Now, I know that Game Week 20 isn't quite over yet, and Game Week 21 is a little bit of a way away, but that doesn't stop me making some FPL content. So here are players to buy and avoid for Game Week 21. Now, I wanted to start the video by talking about Phil Foden. I really think he's probably the best Man City midfielder in FPL at the moment, and with players having to sell Son and Salah due to go into AFCON, they're going to be wanting to look for a midfielder basically, and I think Phil Foden is really a player to consider. He started the last 8 Man City Premier League games, played 90 in the last 4 of them as well. He's got 4 attacking returns in his last 3 games. I think Man City, since returning from the Club World Cup, particularly from the second half against Everton onwards, I mean, they really appear to have hit their sort of title-winning stride, and yeah, you can't not want to hop on to some Man City players at this point in time. And they've got a really nice set of upcoming fixtures as well. Newcastle, on the face of it, you might think is quite tough, but based on current recent form, Newcastle, literally one of the weaker teams in the league at the moment. They are the worst team over the last month for expected goals conceded. And they got Burnley, Brentford, Everton and Chelsea. I mean, I see Man City winning all of those fixtures, scoring a multitude of goals, and Phil Foden being involved in that. And he's got 4 attacking returns in his last 3 games. He's in decent form at the moment, and I think he's a really nice option to add to your team. Next up, we've got Eberiche Eze. Now, he's fit and back in the Crystal Palace team. I really think he's a player to consider going for, even though he's got Arsenal in Game Week 21. I wouldn't rule out Crystal Palace scoring in that game. We all know how good they are against the top teams away from home. They've obviously taken lots of points off Man City in the past. I don't see that changing really with Arsenal. I think they could give them a good game and potentially score some goals. He is the Crystal Palace penalty taker as well. A nice differential, only 2.8% owned. And I'd say he just looks a threat in every game I see him play for Crystal Palace, really regardless of the opposition that they're playing. With Elise being back in the team in particular, he links up really well with him, and those returns we've seen across the season so far, they don't look that strong, but most of them have been achieved without Elise in the team. So factoring Elise back in, we can see, in my opinion, those returns ramp up, and he looks a threat in every game I've seen him, and he's just nailed to start for 90 minutes, and he takes the penalties. Those are just 3 things you absolutely love to see in an FPL asset. Now, the player I just spoke about, Michael Elise, is another player I'd recommend for upcoming game weeks. He's, again, nailed to start for Palace, plays 90 minutes, and he's putting up some really good both underlying numbers and actual numbers. He's got 6 returns from 7 starts so far, which there was nothing to be sniffed at. That's really, really good. And I say also, he's just an uber differential, 1.2% ownership at the moment. So if you go for him, 99% of the game basically don't have him. And I'd say at sub 6 million, he's cheap enough where you don't need to start him every week. And potentially, if you're selling Son and Salah to get Haaland, something like that, he could be an option, a nice cheap midfielder to replace them that you don't necessarily have to start every week. I imagine, most players go for a 3-4-3, but potentially a decent midfielder is like the 12th man. And Elise could be that player. And yeah, nailed to start for Palace, 90 minutes, better open play numbers than Eze. Not quite, obviously, as good. Well, he's not on penalties, basically, so the overall numbers are about the same. But open play-wise, Elise is better than Eze, so that little thing to weigh up, I think, when choosing between them. Next up, we've got Alejandro Garnacho. I've spoken about him in previous videos, but again, he is an option that could enable you to get back to Haaland playing 3 up front. So you've got a little while, of course, until Game Week 21, so things might change by the time the Game Week actually happens and this video goes out of date, but in my opinion, the best team in FPL involves a 3-4-3 formation involving Erling Haaland, Ollie Watkins and Solanke up front. And in order to do that, most people have a 4.5 million forward sitting on their bench at the moment every week. And I think in order to enable that 3-4-3 team, you're going to need to switch that cheap striker for a cheap midfielder. And I think the cheap midfielder you can go for is Alejandro Garnacho. Of all the midfielders under 5 million, he's putting up the best numbers. I'd say he's first choice winger for Man United. Whether he plays on the left or right, I don't think really matters. He's first choice, and he's got a nice set of upcoming fixtures. Tottenham, Wolves, West Ham, Villa and Luton. Obviously, the Villa one's a bit tough, but I wouldn't rule out United scoring in those games. And they haven't been great in terms of results recently, but in terms of goals, they're not struggling to score, I would say. And Garnacho, well, away from home they are, but Garnacho really isn't. He's in a great run of form at the moment, and I think he's a nice option to enable you to get Haaland back into your team. Now, I think it's fair to say that Douglas Luiz has been catching a number of players' eyes this season, but they just haven't been able to justify bringing him into their teams. But I've come to the conclusion now that I think he's a decent FPL asset. He's proven enough over 19 games, half the season now, that he's a decent option. 9 returns in total. Obviously, he's the Villa penalty taker, so a lot of those goals have come from Villa penalties. But I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, right? I mean, penalties happen in the Premier League. Villa seem to win quite a lot of them, and I think he's a good option. And not only that, he has been chipping in with open play goals, and he's got 3 assists as well. And at 5.5 million, he's another really nice option, and he is one of the highest scoring midfielders in FPL at the moment. Certainly ones that will be available once AFCON and the Asia Cup start. When you look at Villa's upcoming fixtures as well, Everton, poor form Newcastle, Sheffield United, Man United, we all know how bad they are, and Fulham after that. It's a nice set of upcoming fixtures where he could, well, continue that run of returns that he's on. And yeah, I think he's a nice option. I've gone past the point now of thinking that he's a bad player and a bad FPL option. No, I've been converted. He's a decent pick, in my opinion. Next up, I just wanted to do a quick little piece on AFCON and Asia Cup. I've done this in a lot of previous videos, so most people watching this video, you're probably bored of me talking about it, but Salah and Son are obviously off to the AFCON and the Asia Cup. And this graphic, according to Rob T FPL on Twitter, thank you Rob for this graphic, he's basically shown, depending on how far in the tournaments players get, when they're likely to return to the Premier League and which FPL game week they're going to be back for. So, you know, in both tournaments, they run pretty much parallel in terms of their schedules, in terms of calendar schedules. So, you know, for each tournament, players will get to the same distance and come home, if that makes sense. You can see they correlate with each other. So basically, in both tournaments, if a player leaves in the group stages, their team gets knocked out in the group stages, they're likely back for game week 23 with a slim chance of being back for 22. And if they win it, we'll get to the final, they're likely back for game week 26. Now, Salah in Egypt, I'd say I don't think they're very strong. I've had some conflicting opinions in the comments, and obviously people are entitled to disagree, and that's absolutely fine. I don't think they're going to get very far. And we're going to see Salah leaving for probably 2 or 3 game weeks and then be back in the game. And I think that's something you need to consider. You know, if you sell Mo Salah, you're probably going to want to leave enough in the bank to bring him back because he's going to be back fairly soon. However, Son and South Korea, I think, are pretty much the strongest team in Asia. And I don't know if they'll win it, but I'm pretty sure they'll get to the semis or the final, which means we'll likely be without Son for 5 or 6 game weeks. So for him, you can plan for life without him. But for Salah, you want to bring in a player that you can easily swap back to him with some cash you have available in the bank, because in my opinion at least, he's going to be back fairly soon. And finally, I just wanted to say a piece on the Aston Villa defence. I've unfortunately recommended them in previous videos because of just their great home form and, yeah, the fact they've been so good at home in you know, one of the surprise teams in the league this season. But defensively, they're not all that amazing, and clean sheet wise, they're certainly not. I've owned Martinez since game week 9, and I can tell you I've had 1 clean sheet out of him in the whole time that I've owned him, and that was when he played Arsenal at Villa Park. That was the only clean sheet I've had from him so far. Yeah, I don't rate them really for clean sheet potential. Moreno in the middle there, he could be a decent option because he's all right going forward, but clean sheet wise, I'm not really backing the Villa defence. I've seen people, me in the past, say Konsa could be a good option, but based on what we've seen, yeah, I'd like to avoid the Villa defence. I think you could do better with the money and go for a team with better, you know, clean sheet odds and expected goals conceded. All right, and that's the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed that one. I hope you enjoyed my new camera. I've just invested some Christmas money and some revenue I've gotten from YouTube basically into a new camera to try and bring my content up to the next level. Although I'm dealing with a bit of cold at the moment, so you could probably hear that in my voice. So the two balance each other out. But hopefully you enjoy looking at my face in crystal clear 4K. But yeah, if you enjoyed the video, please leave me a like rating. Let me know in the comments what you think of some of those, you know, players to buy and avoid that I recommended. And yeah, subscribe just here if you want to see more content from me. And I'll catch you in my next video.